Lee Jinho watched the transport ship explode in the black space above Kepler 442b. The bright flash lasted only seconds before the vacuum swallowed the light and left nothing but floating metal pieces. He stood at the observation deck of the mining station and felt his stomach drop. That ship was supposed to take him home to Earth in 2 hours. The Valthron inspection had gone wrong. Commander Kale Morthak had boarded the human transport with his soldiers to check for smuggled goods. Nobody expected the ship's old reactor to overload during the search. The captain tried to evacuate, but the explosion came too fast. Jinho was lucky to be on the station checking final equipment reports when it happened. Now he was stuck on this rock with a bunch of aliens who barely tolerated humans. The Velthrons were tall creatures with thick gray skin and 4 arms. They looked like walking tanks and acted like they owned the galaxy. Most of them thought humans were weak and only good for fixing machines. Jinho had worked on their mining equipment for 6 months and heard their whispered comments about soft pink skin and fragile bones. Commander Kale walked into the observation area. His massive frame filled the doorway, and his dark eyes scanned the debris field. "The transport is gone," he said in his deep voice. "You will need to find another way home." Jinho turned from the window. "How long until the next human ship arrives?" "There are no scheduled arrivals. You may need to wait several months. Several months on a world where the aliens saw him as a useful pet at best." Jinho rubbed his forehead and tried to think. The mining consortium that hired him would eventually send another ship, but bureaucracy moved slowly in space. He might be stuck here for a year. "I will assign you quarters in the civilian section," Kale continued. "You may continue your technical duties while you wait." "Thank you," Jinho said, though he did not feel grateful. 3 days later, the real crisis began. Jinho was in the main engineering bay, calibrating a new drill system when the alarms started. Screaming. Red lights flashed throughout the facility, and automated voices spoke in the harsh Vilethron language. He did not understand the words, but the tone was clear. Something very bad was happening. Mining Chief Vornash burst into the bay. His 4 arms moved frantically as he shouted orders to his crew. When he saw Jinho, he switched to broken English. "Reactor problem, big problem, very dangerous." Jinho followed Vornash to the central control room, where dozens of Vilethron technicians worked at glowing screens. The main display showed a schematic of the underground power plant that supplied energy to the entire mining colony. Deep beneath the surface, a massive fusion reactor was running too hot. The cooling systems had failed and the temperature was climbing toward critical levels. "How many people live in the underground cities?" Jinho asked. 12,000, Vornash replied. "Many families, children. If the reactor exploded, it would vaporize everything within 50 kilometers underground. The surface facilities might survive, but everyone living in the deep tunnels would die instantly." Jinho studied the display and felt his blood go cold. The reactor design looked familiar. "This is a human design," he said. "Modified Yamamoto-class fusion plant." Vornash nodded. "We bought the plans from human traders 20 years ago. Our engineers made improvements. Those improvements were probably what caused the problem." Jinho had worked on similar reactors during his training on Earth. The Yamamoto design was solid, but it needed specific safety protocols that the Velthrons might not understand. He could see several critical errors in their modifications. "Someone needs to go into the reactor chamber and manually reset the cooling system," Jinho said. "It has to be done from inside." The room went quiet. Every Velthron turned to look at him. Commander Kale stepped forward. "The radiation levels in that chamber would kill any of my people in minutes." Jinho checked the readings again. The numbers were bad, but not impossible. Humans had better radiation resistance than most species, though not by much. He would need a full environmental suit and radiation medication. Even then, he might die from exposure. But if he did nothing, 12,000 aliens would definitely die. "I can do it," he said. The Velthrons stared at him like he had declared his intention to fly by flapping his arms. Vornash spoke first. "You would die. Why would you sacrifice yourself for us?" Jinho thought about that question. These people had not been particularly kind to him. They treated him like a hired tool and barely acknowledged his existence most days. But they were still people. They had families and children and hopes for the future. The idea of letting them all die because of a preventable accident made him sick. Because it's the right thing to do, he said simply. Commander Kyle studied Jinho with new interest. You would risk your life for beings you barely know? Wouldn't you do the same for humans if the situation was reversed? Kyle did not answer. Immediately, his species valued honor and courage above all else, but they also believed in the natural order of strong and weak. The idea of the weak sacrificing for the strong challenged everything he understood about the universe. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of preparation. Jinho squeezed into the heaviest radiation suit the station had, while Valthran medics pumped him full of anti-radiation drugs. The suit was designed for their larger bodies, so it hung loose on his smaller frame, but it would have to work. Vornash downloaded the technical specifications to a portable tablet and explained the manual. Override procedures. The reset switch is deep inside the reactor core, he said. You will have perhaps 10 minutes before the radiation becomes lethal, even with protection. Jinho nodded and checked his equipment one final time. The elevator ride down to the reactor level felt like descending into hell. The temperature climbed with each floor, and his radiation detector began clicking faster. When the doors opened, he stepped into a nightmare of steam and flashing warning lights. The reactor chamber was a massive cavern carved from solid rock. In the center sat the fusion plant like a metallic mountain surrounded by cooling pipes and control systems. The air shimmered with heat and radiation. Jinho's detector was clicking so fast it sounded like static. He ran toward the reactor core, following the path Vornash had shown him on the blueprints. His boots splashed through puddles of coolant that had leaked from damaged pipes. The environmental suit felt heavy and clumsy, but he pushed forward step by step. The radiation levels climbed higher with each meter toward the core. The manual override panel was exactly where the schematics said it would be. Jinho pulled out his tablet and compared the real switches to the technical drawings. His hands shook inside the thick gloves as he began the reset sequence. First, the emergency vents to reduce pressure. Then, the backup cooling pumps. Finally, the manual restart for the primary cooling system. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then the reactor's angry red glow began to fade as the cooling systems came back online. The temperature readings on his tablet started dropping. He had done it. The walk back to the elevator felt longer than the trip in. His legs were weak, and his head was spinning from radiation exposure. By the time he reached the surface level, he could barely stand. Commander Kale and Vornash were waiting with medical teams, who immediately rushed him to the hospital bay. As the doctors worked to treat his radiation poisoning, Jinho heard Vornash speaking to Kale in their own language. He did not understand the words, but the tone was different now. There was something like respect in the mining chief's voice. "You saved us all," Kyle said quietly. "Why?" Jinho closed his eyes and felt the medication starting to work. Someone had to. That night, as he drifted in and out of consciousness in the medical bay, Jinho heard voices in the corridor. Valthran families were coming to thank the human who had risked everything to save their children. For the first time since arriving on this world, he felt like he belonged somewhere. The medical bay on Kepler 442b had never treated a human before. Healer Tamzera studied the readings from Jinho's body with fascination and concern. His cellular structure was repairing radiation damage at a rate she had never seen in any species. The human should have been dead or dying, but instead he was slowly getting better. "Your people are more resilient than we believed," she told Jinho as she checked his blood work for the 5th time that week. Jinho managed a weak smile from his hospital bed. "We're tougher than we look." The radiation exposure had left him sick and weak, but alive. His hair had fallen out and his skin was pale, but the worst symptoms were fading. The Valthran medical team had expected him to die within days. Instead, he was asking for books to read and complaining about the bland liquid food. "I have never seen cellular regeneration like this," Tamzera continued. "Your DNA repair mechanisms are extraordinary. We assumed humans were fragile because of your soft appearance." "Appearances can be deceiving," Jinho said. Word of the human sacrifice had spread throughout the mining colony. Families who had never spoken to him before now stopped by the medical bay to express their gratitude. They brought small gifts and simple foods their children had made. Young Zintar visited every day after his engineering classes to talk about technical problems, and asked questions about human technology. Is it true that humans invented faster than light travel? The young Vielthran asked during one visit. We contributed to it, Jinho replied. Many species worked together to solve that problem. Zintar's sister Nell Anya often came with him. She taught young Vielthrans in the colony school and was curious about human culture and history. Her questions were different from her brother's, technical interests. Do humans really have only 2 arms? She asked with genuine curiosity. Jinho laughed and held up his hands. Just these 2. We have to be more creative about solving problems. But how do you carry things and work at the same time? We make tools and we work together. What one human cannot do alone, 2 humans can accomplish easily. Nelanya found this concept fascinating. Vielthran society valued individual strength and capability. The idea of cooperation making up for physical limitations was new to her. After 2 weeks in the medical bay, Jinho was well enough to return to light duties. Commander Kyle assigned him quarters in the civilian residential area instead of the temporary workers section. The new room was larger and had a small kitchen where he could prepare his own meals. His first day back at work brought a new crisis. The colony's water purification system was failing and producing contaminated supplies. The Vielthran engineers had spent days trying to solve the problem without success. When Jinho examined the system, he quickly identified the issue. The filtration membranes are installed backwards, he explained to Vornash. Simple mistake, but it blocks the cleaning cycles. The fix took 30 minutes. Clean water flowed through the system within an hour. Vornash looked embarrassed that his team had missed such an obvious error, but Jinho was diplomatic about it. Fresh eyes often see things that familiar ones miss, he said. Happens to everyone. A few days later, the communications array started producing static and dropping signals to the orbital platforms. Again, Jinho found the problem quickly. A software update had changed some critical timing parameters that the Vielthran technicians did not understand. He spent an afternoon rewriting the code and explaining the changes to Zintar, who was eager to learn. Human programming methods are different from ours, the young engineer observed. More flexible, but also more complex. We have to account for many variables, Jinho explained. Humans work with dozens of different species, so our technology has to adapt to many situations. These small successes began to change how the Vielthrans saw their human guest. Instead of a temporary burden, he became a valuable member of the community. His different perspective and experience with diverse technologies made him useful in ways they had not expected. Commander Kale started consulting with Jinho on technical decisions. The military officer's attitude had shifted dramatically since the reactor incident. He no longer saw humans as weak, but began to recognize that different kinds of strength existed. Your people surprise me, Kale admitted during one of their discussions. We assumed physical power was the only measure of worth. Every species has evolved different advantages, Jinho replied. Vielthrans are strong and durable. Humans are adaptable and creative. Both have value. The commander considered this carefully. Our military doctrine has always focused on direct confrontation. We win through superior force and discipline. That works well against similar opponents, Jinho said. But what happens when you face an enemy that fights differently? This question would prove prophetic sooner than either of them expected. 3 weeks after the reactor incident, Jinho finally managed to contact Earth through the long-range communications array. The signal had to bounce through several relay stations and the conversation was delayed by light speed limitations, but it was wonderful to hear human voices again. Jinho, this is Transport Command, came the scratchy voice from the speakers. We received your distress signal about the destroyed ship. Are you injured or in immediate danger? I'm safe, Jinho replied, staying with the Vielthran mining colony as a temporary guest. When can you send a pickup ship? The delay stretched for long minutes before the answer came back. Earliest available transport is 6 months out. Commercial shipping to that sector is limited. Can you survive that long? 6 months. Jinho looked around the communications center where several Vielthran technicians were pretending not to listen to his conversation. Zintar and Nelanya had become genuine friends. Tamzera was teaching him about Vielthran medicine while he shared human medical techniques with her. Even Commander Kyle had started treating him as an equal rather than a temporary problem. "I can manage 6 months," he told Earth. "The locals have been very hospitable." After ending the communication, Jinho found himself thinking about what hospitality really meant. The Velthrons had not been particularly welcoming at first, but they had given him food and shelter when he needed it. More importantly, they had allowed him to help when the reactor crisis threatened their families. That trust meant something. Zintar approached him as he left the communications center. "You will be staying longer?" "Looks like it. I hope that's not a problem." The young Velthron's expression was hard to read, but his voice sounded pleased. "Nilanya will be happy. She enjoys your stories about human worlds." That evening, Jinho joined several Velthron families for their communal dinner in the main dining hall. This had become a regular occurrence since his recovery. The food was still strange to his human palate, but the company was warm and welcoming. Vornash raised his cup in a toast. "To our human friend who risked everything for people he barely knew." "To new understandings between our peoples, Commander," Kale added. Jinho raised his own cup but felt uncomfortable with the praise. "I just did what anyone would do in that situation." "No," Tamsara said firmly. "Not anyone would risk radiation poisoning to save strangers. That kind of courage is rare in any species." As the weeks passed, Jinho settled into a comfortable routine. His technical work kept him busy during the days while evenings were spent, learning about Velthron culture and sharing human knowledge. He taught Nilanya's students about Earth's history and geography. In return, Zintar showed him advanced Velthron engineering techniques. The cultural exchange worked both ways. Jinho learned that Velthrons valued honor and family loyalty above individual achievement. Their society was more communal than he had first realized. The apparent coldness he had experienced was actually formal politeness toward outsiders. Once accepted into the community, he found them warm and generous. "We judge people by their actions, not their words," Commander Kale explained. "Your willingness to sacrifice for our families proved your character." "In human culture, we have a saying," Jinho replied. "Actions speak louder than words." "Your people understand honor then." "We understand that what matters is not what we say we will do, but what we actually do when it counts." Kyle nodded approvingly. This was a concept his warrior culture could respect. As his stay extended into the second month, Jinho began to feel like a true member of the colony rather than a temporary guest. He had his own responsibilities and relationships. People came to him for advice on technical problems, and he joined the informal discussion groups that debated everything from engineering solutions to child-rearing practices. The arrangement worked well for everyone involved. Jinho's knowledge and skills made him valuable to the community, while the Velthrons provided him with purpose and belonging. Neither side realized how much this quiet period of cooperation and mutual respect would matter when the real test of their friendship arrived with fire and death from the void between stars. The attack came without warning on a quiet morning when Jinho was teaching Zintar about human sensor technology. The first sign of trouble was the communications array going silent. All contact with the orbital defense station simply stopped. In the middle of a routine status report, Commander Kale was in the control room within minutes, demanding answers from his technicians. The orbital platform had vanished from their tracking screens as if it had never existed. Long-range sensors showed nothing but empty space where the station should have been. "Technical malfunction?" Vornash asked hopefully. Kale's expression was grim as he studied the readings. "No debris field. No distress signals. The entire platform is simply gone." Jinho felt cold dread settling in his stomach. He had heard stories about ships and stations that vanished without explanation in the frontier regions. Pirates usually left wreckage behind. Only one enemy was known for making targets disappear so completely. "Commander," he said quietly, "have you ever heard of the Skarn Horde?" Every Velthron in the control room turned to stare at him. Their faces showed the same fear he was feeling. The Skarn were nightmares from the outer darkness, a species that conquered worlds not for resources or territory, but for the simple pleasure of domination. They enslaved some populations and exterminated others based on criteria no one understood. "The Skarn are myth," one of the technicians said hopefully. "Stories to frighten children." "The Skarn are real," Kale replied. Intelligence reports confirm their existence, but they operate far beyond our borders. This is Velthron space. They would not dare attack here. As if summoned by his words, the long-range sensors suddenly blazed with new contacts. Dozens of ships were emerging from hyperspace at the edge of the system. Their profiles matched no known Velthron or human designs. The vessels were angular and aggressive-looking like metal predators built for war. Enemy fleet detected, the sensor operator announced unnecessarily. Estimated 40 to 50 ships of unknown configuration. Kale activated the colony's emergency protocols. Alarms began wailing throughout the facility as blast doors sealed critical areas and automated defenses came online. The few orbital weapons platforms that protected the mining world powered up their systems and began targeting the approaching fleet. Send distress signals to the nearest Velthron naval bases, Kyle ordered. Request immediate military assistance. Already. Transmitting, sir, the communications officer replied. Nearest fleet units are 6 days away at maximum speed. 6 days. The attacking force would reach Kepler 442b in less than 12 hours. The colony's defenses consisted of a handful of orbital platforms and Kale's small garrison of 200 soldiers. Against 50 warships, they had no hope of victory. Begin civilian evacuation to the deep shelters, Kyle continued. Priority to families with children. Jinho watched the organized chaos as military training took over. The Velthrons moved with disciplined efficiency, despite their obvious fear. Parents gathered their children while emergency teams distributed supplies and checked shelter systems. Everyone knew they were probably going to die, but no one panicked or abandoned their duties. What can I do to help? Jinho asked. Kale looked at him with surprise. You should evacuate with the civilians. You are not a soldier. I'm not going to hide while your people fight to protect me. The commander studied Jinho's face for a long moment. Very well. Help coordinate the shelter assignments. Your technical knowledge may be useful. The next few hours passed in a blur of desperate preparation. The civilian population fled to reinforced bunkers deep underground while Kale's soldiers took positions around critical installations. The orbital defense platforms managed to destroy 3 attacking ships before being overwhelmed and obliterated. By evening, the Skarn fleet was in orbit and launching landing craft toward the surface. Jinho found himself in the main command bunker with Kyle and his senior officers. The facility was buried under 50 meters of rock and equipped with enough supplies to last for weeks. Heavy blast doors and force fields protected the entrances, but everyone knew the defenses would not hold forever. Their ground forces are landing at the main spaceport, reported Lieutenant Veltan. Approximately 2,000 soldiers with heavy weapons and armored vehicles. Our defensive positions? Kale asked. Beta Company is falling back from the outer perimeter. Gamma Company still holds the industrial complex, but they are taking heavy casualties. The situation was hopeless. 200 Velthron soldiers could not defeat 2,000 Skarn warriors no matter how bravely they fought. Conventional military doctrine called for surrender to minimize civilian casualties, but Kale's expression suggested he had no intention of giving up. The Skarn do not take prisoners, he said grimly. They will kill our people whether we resist or not. We fight until the end. Jinho had been listening to the tactical reports and studying the enemy patterns on the display screens. The Skarn were advancing methodically using overwhelming force to crush any resistance. Their tactics were brutally effective but also predictable. They expected their enemies to meet them head-on in traditional battles. Commander, he said, carefully. May I make a suggestion? Kyle looked at him with curiosity. You have military experience? Not formal training, but I've studied human guerrilla warfare techniques. Sometimes the weak can defeat the strong through unconventional methods. The Velthron officers exchanged glances. Their culture valued honor and direct confrontation. The idea of hiding and striking from ambush went against everything they believed about proper warfare. But with annihilation staring them in the face, even honor had its limits. Explain your proposal, Kyle said. Jinho moved to the tactical display and began highlighting locations throughout the underground tunnel system. The Skarn are used to fighting enemies who meet them openly. They don't expect resistance from below or behind their lines. These mining tunnels extend for hundreds of kilometers in every direction. We could use them to hit supply convoys and communication centers. Cowards' warfare, muttered one of the officers. Survival warfare, Jinho corrected. The goal is not glorious death, but protecting your people long enough for help to arrive. Kyle studied the tunnel maps with growing interest. You propose we abandon the surface entirely? Use it as bait. Let them think they've won while we strike from the shadows. Every patrol they send into the tunnels is vulnerable. Every supply convoy has to travel predictable routes. We make this world cost them more than it's worth. The plan went against every military tradition the Vilethrons held sacred, but it offered something conventional. Tactics could not. Hope. Over the next 2 hours, they worked out the details. Small teams would evacuate through hidden tunnel exits and establish cache points throughout the underground network. When the Skarn inevitably pushed into the tunnels hunting for survivors, they would find prepared kill zones and coordinated ambush sites. It might work, Kale admitted reluctantly, but it requires abandoning honor for survival. Honor is meaningless if everyone dies, Jinho replied. Live to fight another day, and you can achieve real victory later. As night fell, the evacuation began. Soldiers and civilian volunteers moved through service tunnels carrying weapons and supplies to hidden staging areas. The main bunker was rigged with explosives to deny it to the enemy, while smaller shelters became bases for the resistance network. Jinho found himself assigned to a mixed team of soldiers and technicians led by Lieutenant Veltan. Their mission was to sabotage Skarn communication equipment and disrupt their coordination efforts. It was dangerous work that required moving through hostile territory, but it played to human strengths of stealth and adaptability. During a brief rest period, Jinho managed to send one final transmission to Earth using an emergency beacon. The message was simple but urgent. He described the Skarn attack and provided detailed intelligence about their technology and tactics. Most importantly, he included personal information about the Vilethrons who had shown him kindness. These people saved my life and welcomed me. As family, he said into the transmitter. They are facing extinction from an enemy that shows no mercy. I don't know if anyone will receive this message, but if you do, please remember what the Vilethrons did for one lost human. The beacon was a one-way device with barely enough power to reach the nearest communications relay. Whether the signal would make it to Earth was impossible to know. But Jinho felt he had to try. These aliens had become more than hosts or colleagues. They were friends worth fighting for. The first Skarn patrol entered the tunnel system 3 days after the invasion began. Jinho's team was waiting for them in a maintenance junction 50 meters below the surface. The enemy soldiers moved cautiously but confidently through the narrow passages. They had motion detectors and energy weapons, but they were not prepared for the coordinated assault that erupted from multiple directions simultaneously. The brief firefight was over in seconds. 6 Skarn warriors died without inflicting a single casualty on the defenders. Their weapons and equipment were quickly stripped before the team melted back into the tunnel network. Within an hour, they had reached a new position 5 kilometers away and were preparing the next ambush. The humans' tactics work, Veltan reported to Kyle during their next communication window. Admiral Park So-young was reviewing fleet readiness reports when the priority transmission arrived at Earth's Solar Defense Command. The message had bounced through 6 relay stations and taken weeks to reach Sol's system, but its contents made her forget about routine paperwork immediately. She read Jinho's desperate plea 3 times before calling an emergency meeting of the Defense Council. Within 2 hours, the most senior military officers in human space were gathered around the holographic display table in the secure briefing room deep beneath Luna Base. The transmission is authentic, confirmed Intelligence Director Bae Do-hyun. Voice pattern analysis matches engineer Lee Jinho's personnel files. The technical data about Skarn weapons and tactics appears genuine based on what little we know about this species. Admiral Park studied the star charts showing Vilethron territory. How long would it take our fastest ships to reach this location? Fleet. Operations Director Shin Young-ho ran quick calculations on his tablet. Standard hyperspace transit would require 6 weeks minimum. The new experimental drives could cut that to 3 weeks, but they've never been tested at such distances. What about our military readiness in that sector? Asked Marine Commandant General Yoo Jae-hyun. 0, Park replied bluntly. We have no bases or supply depots anywhere near Velthran space. Any fleet we send would be operating completely independent, with no possibility of reinforcement or resupply. The room fell silent as the officers considered the implications. Earth had built a powerful military force during the decades since first contact with alien civilizations, but that strength was concentrated in Sol system and nearby colonies. Projecting force across hundreds of light years into unknown territory was an enormous risk. "Why should we intervene?" asked Director Bay. "These Vilethrons are not allies. We have no formal treaties or obligations to them." Admiral Park touched the display controls and brought up Jinho's message again. His voice filled the room, describing the alien families who had welcomed him and the young engineer who visited him every day in the medical bay. He spoke of Commander Kyle's growing respect and the teacher, Nelanya's curiosity about human culture. "They helped one of our people when they didn't have to," Park said quietly. "That matters." "Sentiment is not military strategy," Director Bay replied. "We cannot risk our fleets for emotional reasons." "This is not just emotion," General Yu interjected. "The strategic implications are significant. If the Skarn horde is expanding into this region, they will eventually threaten human space. Better to stop them now while we have potential allies." Park nodded agreement. "Intelligence reports suggest the Skarn are a serious threat to galactic stability. They don't negotiate or trade. They conquer and destroy. If we let them eliminate the Vilethrans, we may face them alone later under worse conditions." The debate continued for several hours, but the Admiral's mind was already made up. Earth had spent decades building military technology specifically designed to deal with hostile alien contact. Their ships carried weapons and defensive systems that no other species had seen in action. This was the moment to test whether human innovation could match alien aggression. "I'm authorizing immediate deployment of the 1st Expeditionary Fleet," Park announced. 12 ships including the carrier Sol and the battleship Incheon. Captain Kim Min-ho will command the fleet with Colonel Yu Jamin's 3rd Marine Regiment embarked. Director Bay looked skeptical. 12 ships against an entire Skarn fleet? "The odds are not favorable." "The Skarn have never faced human technology," Park replied. "Our weapon systems are completely different from anything they know. Sometimes, surprise is worth more than numbers." Captain Kim Min-ho received his orders 6 hours later, while his ship was docked at the Titan Naval Facility. The Sol was Earth's newest fleet carrier, equipped with the latest fighter squadrons and experimental defensive systems. Her escort ships were equally advanced with plasma cannons and quantum torpedo launchers that existed nowhere else in the galaxy. "How long do we have to prepare?" asked Colonel Yu as he reviewed the mission parameters. 18 hours, Kim replied. "Admiral Park wants us underway as soon as possible. Every day we delay means more Valthron civilians die." The loading process was frantic but efficient. Human military logistics had been refined through decades of interplanetary operations. Within 12 hours, the fleet was fully supplied with ammunition, food, and spare parts for an extended independent campaign. The experimental hyperspace drives were tested and certified, ready for long-distance transit. Commander Han Mirai gathered her fighter pilots in the Sol's briefing room for final mission planning. The pilots were young and eager, having trained for years without seeing real combat. Now they would face an enemy that had been terrorizing the galaxy for generations. "Intelligence reports indicate Skarn fighters are heavily armored but slow," she explained while highlighting enemy vessel profiles. "Our advantages are speed, maneuverability, and advanced targeting systems. Use those advantages and don't try to go toe-to-toe with their heavy weapons." The hyperspace jump to Valthran territory was the longest ever attempted by human ships. For 3 weeks, the fleet traveled through the twisted dimensions beyond normal space, while their crews ran endless combat drills and studied every scrap of intelligence about their enemy. Captain Kim spent his time planning the battle that awaited them. The Skarn fleet was massive and experienced, while his ships were untested in real combat. But human technology included several innovations that might level the odds. Adaptive AI defense systems that could learn enemy patterns in real time. Quantum encrypted communications that were theoretically impossible to jam. Most importantly, weapons designed by humans who thought differently about warfare than any other species. The transit was not without problems. 2 ships suffered drive failures that required emergency repairs in hyperspace. The battleship Busan developed power fluctuations that threatened her main armament. But human engineering proved equal to the challenges, and the fleet emerged into normal space at the edge of the Kepler system, intact and ready for battle. What they found there was worse than anyone had expected. Long-range sensors showed debris fields where Veilthron defense platforms had been destroyed. The mining world itself was dark, with no orbital traffic or communication signals. Skarn ships patrolled the system in overwhelming numbers, while their ground forces had clearly conquered the surface installations. "Any signs of resistance?" Kim asked his sensor officer. "Difficult to say, sir. There are intermittent energy discharges from the underground areas that might indicate fighting, but the Skarn seem to control all surface positions." Kim studied the tactical display with growing anger. Somewhere down on that world, Jinho was probably fighting alongside his alien friends against impossible odds. The engineer's message had described people with honor and courage who deserved better than extinction at the hands of raiders. "Signal the fleet," he ordered. "Battle stations. All ships attack formation Beta. Target priority is enemy vessels threatening the planet." The Skarn were caught completely off guard by the sudden appearance of human warships. Their sensors had been watching for Veilthron reinforcements, not unknown alien vessels with unfamiliar energy signatures. The first indication of danger was when 3 of their patrol ships simply vanished in balls of plasma fire. Human weapons technology was unlike anything the Skarn had encountered. Plasma cannons that fired coherent energy bursts capable of penetrating any known armor. Quantum torpedoes that phased through defensive shields and exploded inside enemy hulls. Point defense lasers that could track and destroy incoming missiles with computer precision. But the real shock was the carrier Sol's fighter squadrons. Commander Han led her pilots in a coordinated strike against the main Skarn battle group that scattered enemy formations and destroyed twice their number of ships. The small human fighters were impossible to target effectively, while their advanced weapons systems picked apart larger vessels with surgical precision. "Enemy fleet is breaking formation," reported the tactical officer aboard Sol. "They appear confused by our attack patterns." Captain Kim was not surprised. Human military doctrine emphasized flexibility and adaptation over rigid battle plans. His ships operated as independent units, coordinating their attacks through quantum communication links that the Skarn could not intercept or jam. Every vessel could adjust its tactics in real time based on battlefield conditions. The space battle raged for 6 hours before the surviving Skarn ships retreated to the outer system. They had lost over half their fleet to an enemy they didn't understand, using weapons they had never seen. The humans had suffered only minor damage and no ship losses, though several vessels needed time for repairs. While the space battle continued, Colonel Yu prepared his Marines for planetary assault. The 3rd Regiment was equipped with powered armor and advanced weapons designed specifically for fighting alien enemies. Their dropships were heavily shielded and armed with enough firepower to clear landing zones against determined resistance. "Intelligence suggests friendly forces are still active in the underground tunnel systems," Yu briefed his company commanders. "Our mission is to link up with these defenders and eliminate the Skarn ground forces." The sound of human voices speaking English in the tunnel depths was like music to Jinho's ears. He had been fighting alongside the Veilthron resistance for 3 weeks, and ammunition was running dangerously low. The Skarn ground forces had adapted to guerrilla tactics and were slowly tightening their grip on the underground network. Lieutenant Veltan pressed against the tunnel wall beside him as footsteps approached their position. The sounds were different from Skarn patrols. These soldiers moved with discipline, but not the mechanical precision of their enemies. When the first figure rounded the corner wearing powered armor with Earth military markings, Jinho nearly cried. "With relief! United Earth Marines!" the soldier announced. "Looking for friendly forces." Jinho stepped into the light with his hands visible. "Engineer Lee Jinho, these are Veilthron resistance fighters." The Marine's helmet retracted to reveal a young woman's face. "Sergeant Kim Hyeri, 3rd Regiment. Are you the one who sent the message to Earth?" "That was me." "How did you get here so fast?" "Admiral Park doesn't believe in leaving people behind," Sergeant Kim replied. "We've secured a surface perimeter and established communication with your resistance leadership. Time to get you out of these tunnels." The evacuation took most of the night as small groups of fighters made their way through Marine-controlled corridors to the surface. Jinho stayed with the last group to help coordinate the withdrawal. When he finally emerged from the underground darkness, he found a transformed battlefield. Human dropships and armored vehicles controlled the main spaceport, while Marine positions surrounded key installations. Overhead, the carrier Sol hung in orbit like a guardian angel flanked by her escort ships. The overwhelming Skarn presence that had dominated the system for weeks was nowhere to be seen. Commander Kyle was waiting at the Marine command post. The Valthran officer looked exhausted but amazed as he studied displays showing human deployments across the planet. His people had been saved by aliens they barely knew because one engineer had asked for help. "Your people came," he said to Jinho with wonder in his voice. "They came for you," Jinho replied. The message was about what the Valthrans did for me. Colonel Yu Jemin approached them with a tactical update. "Skarn ground forces are in full retreat toward their remaining ships. Our orbital sensors show enemy reinforcements approaching from deep space, but they won't arrive for several days." "How many ships?" asked Commander Kyle. "Approximately 100 vessels, much larger than the original invasion force." The numbers were sobering. Earth's expeditionary fleet had performed brilliantly against the first Skarn attack, but facing odds of nearly 10 to 1 was a different challenge entirely. Human technology was superior, but physics still imposed limits on what 12 ships could accomplish. "We need to evacuate your people," Colonel Yu continued. "Our transports can carry several thousand civilians to safety before the enemy reinforcements arrive." Kale's expression hardened. "This is our world. We will not abandon it." "Colonel," Jinho interjected, "may I speak with Admiral Park directly?" The communication link to the fleet flagship was established within minutes. Admiral Park's image appeared on the tactical display screen, looking calm despite the approaching crisis. She had reviewed Jinho's situation reports and understood exactly what was at stake. "Engineer Lee," she said formally, "your message was received and acted upon. Earth honors its debts." "Thank you, Admiral, but there's something you need to know. The Skarn reinforcement fleet is massive. Your ships have already done more than anyone could expect." 12 ships cannot defeat 100, Park agreed, "but 12 ships can buy time for something bigger to arrive." The display shifted to show new contacts emerging from hyperspace at the edge of the system. Not just individual ships, but an entire fleet group. 30 vessels flying Earth's colors and carrying enough firepower to glass a planet. Admiral Park had held nothing back for this operation. "The second expeditionary fleet under Admiral Nam Tae-hoon," Park explained. "We couldn't risk sending our full strength initially, but once we confirmed the situation, every available ship was dispatched." Captain Kim Minho's voice joined the communication from Seoul's bridge. "Admiral, we're detecting Skarn command ships broadcasting on multiple frequencies. It sounds like they're trying to establish communication." Park's expression was grim but satisfied. "Put them through." The alien voice that filled the communication channel was harsh and mechanical. The universal translator struggled with Skarn linguistic patterns, but the meaning was clear enough. They wanted to negotiate. "Human. Fleet, this is War Leader Gorthak of the Skarn Horde. We did not know this world was under your protection. We propose division of territory to avoid unnecessary conflict." Admiral Park's response was immediate and uncompromising. "War Leader, this is Admiral Park of the United Earth Fleet. There will be no division of territory. You will withdraw all forces from Valthran space immediately or face the consequences. You cannot defeat our full fleet, human. We outnumber your ships 5 to 1. Numbers are not everything, War Leader. Your forces have already learned that lesson. Choose wisely." The communication ended abruptly as Skarn transmissions ceased. On Kepler 442b, the waiting began as both sides prepared for what might be the largest space battle in galactic history. Human and Valthran forces worked together to establish defensive positions while Admiral Nam's fleet moved into attack formation. But the battle never came. After 6 hours of tense standoff, the Skarn fleet began withdrawing toward the system's edge. Their war leader had studied the wreckage of his advance forces and decided that human technology was too dangerous to challenge with conventional tactics. The formal transmission came 12 hours later as the last Skarn ships jumped to hyperspace. War leader Gorthak's final message was brief and to the point. "The Skarn Horde acknowledges human territorial claims in this region. We will not return." On the surface of Kepler 442b's celebration mixed with exhaustion as the siege finally ended. Valthran families emerged from the deep shelters to find their world liberated by allies they had never expected. Human Marines and Earth engineers worked alongside local teams to repair the damage and restore normal operations. Jinho found himself in the unusual position of being a hero to both species. The Vielthrons honored him for risking his life to save their reactor. The humans celebrated him for forging the alliance that brought Earth into galactic politics. He was uncomfortable with the attention, but grateful for the outcome. "What happens now?" Nelanya asked during one of the quieter moments. She had spent the siege teaching children in the underground shelters and was eager to return to normal life. "Now we build something new," Jinho replied. "Earth and the Valthran Empire working together." The formal alliance negotiations began. A week later, aboard the flagship Sol, Admiral Park and Commander Kyle worked out the details of mutual defense agreements and technology-sharing protocols. What had started as a rescue mission was becoming the foundation for humanity's entry into galactic civilization. "Your people's intervention has changed everything," Kale told Admiral Park during one of their planning sessions. "The Skarn will think twice before attacking anyone under Earth's protection." "That was the idea," Park replied. "Sometimes the best defense is making your enemies afraid to attack in the first place." The technology exchanges proved beneficial to both sides. Human adaptive AI systems complemented Velthran engineering excellence, while Earth's weapon designs provided new defensive options for the Empire's military. More importantly, the cultural exchanges begun by Jinho's stay on Kepler 442b continued, expanding. 6 months later, Jinho stood on the observation deck of the New Earth Embassy on the Velthran capital world. Through the transparent walls, he could see human and Velthran children playing together in the gardens below. Zintar had accepted a position with Earth's Engineering Corps, while Nelanya was teaching at the Joint Cultural Center. "Do you ever regret staying?" Commander Kale asked as he joined Jinho at the window. The Vielthran officer now wore the insignia of Earth's first alien exchange student at the Naval Academy. "Not for a minute," Jinho replied. "This is where I belong." The irony was not lost on him. He had come to Kepler 442b as a temporary worker fixing alien machines. He was staying as Earth's first ambassador to an alien empire. The job description had changed somewhat, but the core mission remained the same, building bridges between different worlds and different peoples. Outside the embassy walls, the city bustled with activity as Velthran and human traders established new commercial relationships. Earth's merchant fleet was already carrying goods between the two civilizations, while joint exploration missions mapped new star systems for colonization. What had begun with one stranded engineer was becoming a partnership that would reshape the galaxy. Admiral Park's final report to Earth's government was read into the historical record with appropriate ceremony. The successful intervention at Kepler 442b demonstrates that humanity's future lies not in isolation, but in building alliances with species who share our values. Engineer Lee Jinho's actions proved that small gestures of courage and kindness can have consequences far beyond what anyone imagines.